Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm the executive director of Cat TV, and we are here for another episode of Trash Talk with Lisa and Paula.
And I'm Paula Camperman. I'm the Outreach Program Manager for the Bennington County Solid Waste Alliance.
So we're really excited to be here talking more about trash. We had a lot of great comments from the last show, so we're excited to be talking about composting today. We're going to learn everything there is to know about composting.
In addition, we're going to talk about the food recovery hierarchy, which is kind of a wonky term to talk about how to make the best use of food. If some of you already know, we have a food scrap ban coming into play on July 1st of 2020, which means after that date we need to keep all of our food scraps out of the trash. This is all part of a recycling law that's been phased in since 2014, and this is the final aspect of it. So today we're going to talk about the top level of the food recovery hierarchy, and it models after the Environmental Protection Agency's hierarchy, in which we're trying to make less waste of the food we grow and use, and then make best use of it as we consume it, and then we send it down to animals, and then send it down to digestion, anaerobic digestion and composting, and energy recovery. So today we're going to talk about food statistics, a little bit of a history of how food played in our world 100 years ago versus today, and how we are needing to be a little more mindful of how we use our food.
Right. So I'm curious, before we jump into this, the ban on scraps in the garbage. So this has been coming since 2014.
Yes.
You said. And
yeah.
I don't think any of us, I certainly hadn't heard of it until I started talking with you. So there's a lot, I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions about what they can do, and I think we're going to get into some of that. But before, you wanted to talk about kind of the thought process behind why the composting is important.
Yes. Composting is just one aspect of it, but our food has been in our lives, obviously, all the way through from, a couple thousand years. We've been composting for a couple thousand years. And so it's a very natural process. But before we get to that, we want to make the highest and best use of food that we grow. So statistically, lately, they've been talking about the amount of food Americans are wasting, which is upwards of 40%. And that's not just consumers, but the manufacturing process, how it's sold, how it's transported, all number of things. So we've got a lot of food we're throwing away and not making use of. So what I'm talking to you today about is how we can reduce the amount of food waste that we have in our daily lives as consumers.
Before it even gets to composting.
Right, exactly. Over the past 100 years, the amount of household budget that we spent on food has gone down dramatically. 100 years ago, we would spend upwards of 40% of our household income on food. Nowadays, it's just over 10% on average.
I find that really interesting, and you were saying that is because food costs necessarily haven't grown with the same inflation rate as other costs, so then therefore it has a smaller impact on our budget.
Right. In fact, food costs have gone down quite a bit, whereas other things in our budget, transportation, healthcare, and housing has gone up quite a bit by means of inflation. And also food costs are more managed because we've got into big agri. It's getting less per unit maybe to produce that particular piece of produce or food, that stuff that we would make on a much smaller scale 100 years ago. So part of that is also contained to it. But to a family that has very limited means, food costs is still very expensive, and it still is a big part of their household income. So somebody that's in the bottom 20th percentile of income, say just over 11,000, will spend upwards of 36% of their budget on food, whereas somebody that's maybe making over 85,000 may only spend about 10.5% of their budget on food. And as you go further up in the income strata, more of that food is purchased outside of the home. So
restaurants.
Yeah, restaurants, exactly. And there's waste inherent in a restaurant preparation as well. So that all adds up to it. And a lot of Americans also, as we get into the food how we look at and perceive food. Our expectations are that we're looking for more perfect food. In the sense, we go to the grocery store and we see these gleaming displays of beautiful stacked produce and how attractive it is, and it's every grocer's objective to get you to buy it naturally, and so they're manufacturing for beautiful food. And you may have heard in some places the food is beautiful manufactured, but the taste has gone out the window because they're producing for the look rather than the taste. And that's what they're saying sometimes about heirloom tomatoes and how they're much more flavorful than commercial grade, because the commercial grade ones are missing the enzyme that it gives its flavor, because they're manufacturing for the taste or the look.
So that conversation probably gets into the genetically modified
piece,
which I don't think we're going to deal with today.
Not today.
But that I think is a piece of some of that, so that they can mass produce
another day.
Yeah. So, but those statistics play a role in what is becoming waste.
Yes, very much so. And so we have to look at ways to counteract that whenever possible. I mean, there are things that are outside of our control, but we as consumers can send a message to the manufacturers and to grocers, distributors, to help understand, they have an obligation. They want to get as much sell-through as well as we want to get as much healthy produce in front of us. And that's really one of the main reasons why there is more food waste in our desire to get more perfect food and avoid food poisoning. So when we're looking at stuff, we're, as consumers, we're picking out things that look wholesome, healthy, and gleaming and beautiful. So it looks good. You think it's going to be fresh. You don't want to buy wilted, icky, droopy stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, there's got to be a happy medium in there somehow, so we're reducing the amount of waste. I know as I mentioned to you earlier, there's some grocery store chains that are trying to sell ugly fruit, ugly produce at a reduced price to try to get more sell-through, so they don't have to take it to the back room and, To our credit, though, in Vermont State, from 2014 to 2017 saw food rescue increase 3 times.
So what do you mean by that? Is that what is being rescued from the grocery stores that isn't being purchased?
Yeah, rescue fruit, grocery stores, restaurants, institutions. They're taking it to food pantries. So that would be food rescue. It's giving it a second life, so it's getting more possible consumption in a proper way as opposed to discarding or composting.
Okay.
So that's Vermont is getting really good at that, which is great.
So that's a huge piece.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's as more I've talked to some grocery store managers, and they're getting very good at ensuring that farmers get their discards that don't go to the food pantry, so they can come in and unpackage items, bread, yogurt, food things out of containers, and they take it to their farmers for their feedstock, and that is another way to try to save waste. But as consumers, we need to get more, up our game, get more.
So that we're not wasting as much food, so that we don't need to compost.
Right, that's the idea. So that as we get in front of this law that's coming into play July 1st next year, the less we have to compost, the less of it is for us to worry about as well.
Right.
So some of the things we can do to reduce food waste is shopping smart. That is getting good about building a grocery list. I don't know if you know everyone that does that.
I'm really pretty good about building a grocery list.
Good,
Yeah.
good. I am too, for the most part. I hearken back to my mother. She talked about how she was a Depression era babe.
Oh, yes.
And that was probably, actually World War II was the last time we actually had food rationing, where people actually had to control the amount of consumption, and it was intended to make sure there was ample supply for everybody and to keep the cost of that particular item down.
Right.
So, but in the case of, planning for shopping, my mother would take a steno pad, these, old-fashioned stenographer pads, and it had 2 columns.
Yeah.
One column she put the meals planned for the week ahead, after she had consulted the supplements of the Sunday paper to know what was on sale, usually the meats and the more expensive items. And then on the right side, she built her shopping list, and she would separate it down the middle, take the right side to the grocery store, and the left side, sit there all week, and I always knew what we were having for dinner. I didn't have to ask her. Yeah. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, that was a bit, nowadays families are very busy and it's hard.
I have a
and-
little sticky note.
Yeah, it's
I
about-
stick it to my phone and
Yeah.
then I go through the grocery
Right, that's what I did too.
store.
I got my, the various
I do
grocery
see,
store.
I do see a lot of people in the grocery store with their phone, and I think that they use their phones for a list.
Yeah,
which-
and also budgeting. I know to keep
Yeah.
track of their what's going
Yeah.
in the cart, so
Yeah.
they have within their budget, which
but
is good.
planning is a huge piece of not wasting.
Yeah.
You have to plan what you're going to eat, because you buy too much and then
Yeah.
it's gone.
And also making point to use all the food that you have in the refrigerator before you go out for your next trip, which is, it's sometimes easier to do than other times, but I try to look at, the produce and say, okay, can I use it in this meal? I've got a little left over, I can add it to that. And,
Right.
if worse comes to worse, I will also make things and I put it in the freezer so it doesn't go bad. I got enough stuff, I can make a soup, base of a soup and stick it in the freezer. Storing food correctly, understanding that, certain items like potatoes, tomatoes, garlic, cucumbers, and onions need to stay out of the refrigerator so they preserve the shelf life, because the taste and the shelf life is shortened considerably.
Now I'm bad at that. I put almost everything in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I have a problem, especially like tomatoes and stuff. But so now I'm going to try, that I'm learning, I'm going to try to keep them out of the fridge and see if they last longer.
You will also notice the flavor is much better, because when you
Okay.
put them in the fridge, it kills the flavor.
All right. So that's good to know.
Yeah. Also separating foods that release ethylene, such as bananas, avocados, tomatoes, green onions, and cantaloupes, peaches, pears. All those release ethylene gas, so you don't want those in your refrigerator because they will destroy other, they'll shorten the life of other items such as potatoes, apples, leafy greens, berries, and peppers.
So separating things like that is really important.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
all these items that I mentioned that have ethylene, I usually store outside of the refrigerator anyway, unless they're getting really ripe, like a cantaloupe I'll put back in the refrigerator, because I know if it's going too quickly, I'll put it in to slow it down, and I know that it's like on the top shelf and away from all the other stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
So, also learning to preserve, to extend the life, like pickling, freezing, drying, curing, fermenting. Those are other ways to extend the life of produce. And then learn to love the ugly produce out there. I've got to work with my kids about that. They like the pristine apples.
But there
and
isn't that much.
No,
no.
no.
For the most part,
Yeah.
as you said, the grocery stores are putting out the pretty stuff.
Yeah, that's
so, that's another piece of it. Although I think I mentioned I've seen a website or a commercial on TV or something that they're selling ugly fruit.
Yes, I've seen that as well.
so-
I'll be interested to see how that business model goes.
Yeah.
Keeping your refrigerator organized so that the things that you know that you got to use up quickly, keep them to the front, or even segment them in a shelf or two, and then keeping your freezer fully stocked. Put things in the freezer anytime, like even herbs. You can freeze herbs very quickly. I put them in ice cube trays and then stick them in for putting them into the soup later on. The more stocked your freezer is, the more efficient it'll work, whereas the less your refrigerator is stocked, the more efficient it will work. Also understand the expiration dates that we see on
Yeah.
food. Those are really just guidelines. There is no regulatory body that is setting those standards. It's internal to every manufacturer or industry. So yes, they're good guidelines, but I don't use that as a way to, it's out of date, throw it out. Like perfect example, yogurt. You have a small yogurt tub, it hasn't been opened yet, single use. Peel it back, okay, it may be 6 days out of date. I'll pull it back, smell it, it's good. Okay,
fine,
give it to my kid.
I have to admit, chicken, I have a problem worrying about chicken and it being fresh. And I bought chicken last week and I didn't get to making it. And it was, the expiration was, I think, Thursday. And by Sunday I was like, and I threw it out.
Did
and
you
I
smell
felt,
it first?
I didn't because I felt I feel so guilty about it
I would smell it
because
from
I
here.
was like, because I'm so worried
Sure.
that I'm going to cook it and it's not going to be good. And I've done
Yeah.
it 100 times. I was like, I'm just going to throw it out. And so now I feel really guilty about it.
Oh, well. Now you
So-
know. You can use your nose, because I've
But-
done that where I get stuff where it's going out of date and they've got like $1 off kind
Yeah.
of thing, and I'll buy it and I'll go home And if I know I'm not going to use it all within it, because it's like mini chicken breasts or something like
Right.
that, I'll take it apart and individually freeze it into some Ziploc bags and stick them in
Yeah.
the freezer, because then I can say, all right, I can just pull them out one at a time.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Not
That
that I
is a good
always
idea.
have time to do that. You make it. I don't want to make it
But
think
you
that's
know,
all I
like
do.
eggs, I know the trick for that is to put it in water to see if it floats or not. So I'll do that a lot.
Yeah.
And try to.
And I use eggs way past their expiration date,
Yeah.
and I don't have any problem.
I
usually.
do that too, but I'll check in.
Yeah.
So if they float, then they're not good.
So other things than that is to pack your lunch whenever you can.
I do every day.
I do too. Yeah. And then compost, which we'll talk about in our next segment.
Yeah. So there's a lot to cover there, and as you were saying, it all is kind of reducing how much the source, as this kind of inverted pyramid shows. So reducing the source of food, and then making sure that people are eating everything that they have, and then producing food for animals. So if we're going down, so making sure that what isn't used by people is being used for animals, and then composting. And then the last thing you were talking about was energy recovery, which I'm not sure we are able to get into, but
Yeah, it's basically burning it off. Composting and anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion is using the lack of oxygen to break down food, and it
Okay.
is used in such a fashion, in a controlled way, to create heat and electricity, actually. So it's another way to make use of food, but it's further on down that hierarchy where you want to try to.
Right. So the importance of this segment then is really making sure that you're conscious of what you're consuming, what you're buying, what you're eating, and reducing the amount of waste that you're putting back into the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Great. Well, we'll be back with another segment after this. So
Right.
thanks so much for tuning in.